Good afternoon. We are the Oklahoma State case study team. My name is Devon, and I'm here today with my team members, Jacob and Abby. And let's get started. So this case study is all about Great Lakes Cooperative, GLC. GLC was formed by the merger of two co-ops in northern Iowa, Everly and Superior. Everly and Superior had similar sales volume, however they differed in the composition of their sales. Everly was more focused on petroleum and feed sales, whereas Superior was more focused on agronomy and product sales. And they also differed in their presence. Everly had locations in 7 cities, whereas Superior had locations in only 2 cities. The differences in their presence led to differences in their management style. Everly was more focused on providing a convenient access to their members with their 7 locations, whereas Superior was focused on building large facilities that could provide their services rapidly. However, if the members didn't live close to those locations, they would have to travel a distance to use their services. To go into a timeline of events, this case study begins in January of 2001 with the merger of Everly and Superior to form GLC. 2004 is when Great Plains Renewable Energy, GPRE, forms and begins operations as an ethanol production company. August of 2005 brings us to Superior Energy purchasing land near the Superior facility of GLC, and they began a working relationship with GLC. Superior Energy was later purchased by GPRE. Early 2007 is when sales of a top beginning of talks of a sale from GLC to GPRE began, and a $30 million bid was offered for the purchase of GLC. August 2007 is when GPRE began their operations in Shenandoah, Iowa. So this case study has several questions that we're looking at today, but the main question we're focusing on right now is if GLC should be sold to GPRE at the current $30 million bid.
So, while we're asking these questions, we really want to keep in mind what framework we're talking about today, and that is new institutional economics. New institutional economics, starts in 1937 with Coase's theory of the firm, and goes through different iterations through Williamson and North throughout history. But basically, it comes down to why do firms exist? Why do these organizations appear in the marketplace? And how can agents take advantage of the division of labor without losing advantages of cooperation? So how do agents in the marketplace complement each other in their actions, essentially? So specifically, we're focusing on transaction cost economics. TCE has advantages over the traditional neoclassical framework because it marries the analytical rigor of the neoclassical school of thought to this whole idea that we have incompleteness of contracts. Humans are short-sighted, and opportunism occurs. So today, some characteristics of transaction costs to keep in mind are asset specificity. So for example, if an investment is made, a specific asset investment is made during a contract, what is the opportunity cost of that investment? Uncertainty that can surround contracts, and of course, frequency of transactions in the marketplace. And so we kind of come to this conclusion in this framework that government structures will occur in ways to minimize transaction costs. So, within this framework, some problems that we see that are very characteristic of cooperatives. The first one would be a free rider problem. We see this all the time in open cooperatives where there's a real low cost to membership. And then, for example, in a cooperative-wide decision, all members want a decision made, but maybe you're not willing to participate or vote. And of course, this also occurs when investment doesn't match use within the cooperative. If this is taking place in Iowa, a lot of those guys might have on-farm storage for grain, so they might be using the cooperative differently than someone who passes a lot of grain volume through there. 2 is a horizon problem. Horizon problem occurs when the residual claim on income from asset is shorter than the productive life of the asset. And I like to think of this in the cooperative structure as my old versus young. So my young guys may have a completely different goal for their cooperative use. They may have 30 to 40 years to utilize this resource versus someone who's maybe in their 60s handing it off to someone in the family or getting out. Their cooperative use is going to be very different. And so the issues this horizon problem causes are things like disincentives for members to invest in things that cause growth and development of the cooperative. It also leads to lower investment in things like research and development and advertising.
So looking at in this issue of the co-op and the ethanol plant, within the or the framework of transaction frequency, we have two primary transactions that we have to look at. The first being between the farmer or collectively the co-op as a whole and how they interact with the ethanol firm. And the second being the ethanol firm and how it answers to its shareholders, meaning it has a different governance structure. So for the farmer or the co-op and the ethanol plant, our transaction costs are going to be minimized when we're originating from our nearest delivery points. And that comes into play within this case study being the location of Superior, being so close to GLC, and how we're going to account for that transaction cost for delivery fees to get there. We're also going to prefer larger deliveries to reduce our transaction costs accounted for within our contract size. Having such, we have a little bit of collective bargaining power within a co-op that we wouldn't have as an individual farmer. Maybe leads to less misappropriating of rents among the different farmers with the ethanol plant. And the ethanol plant, on the other hand, is going to be answering to its shareholders rather than its members, and we're going to be looking at accounting for profit as their main goal rather than the cooperation among farmers providing marketing assets, grain storage, etc. And so they're also going to prefer the larger contracts to reduce their transaction costs associated with origination.
So that brings us to the question about what governance structure should GLC have that maximizes both the producer's profits and personal benefits. And we're going to provide some alternative strategies for GLC, but first we're going to talk about what GLC currently is, and that is an open co-op, which is where producers can join at any time by making a small initial investment. They build their equity through retained earnings and through per unit retains, and this equity does lack a secondary market. And this does result in insufficient funds for value-added, capital-intensive projects later on. So the first alternative strategy that we're going to suggest for GLC would be to create a new generation co-op. And that would be where the membership would be limited to those members who want to purchase stock in the cooperative, and members also purchase and then receive delivery rights. A larger upfront investment is required of these producers, and however, the cooperative stock can be traded among members in the co-op, therefore the equity does have a secondary market. Two more alternative strategies that we're going to suggest for GLC, the first being an investor co-op hybrid model, and that would be where the cooperative would work underneath an LLC, and there would be two classes of membership, the first being outside equity investors and the second being inside patron stockholders, and the returns would be split between these two groups. The last model we're going to suggest for GLC would be to become an investor-focused governance structure, and that would allow for producers to invest without making any delivery commitments. And something to note about this model, though, is that this does eliminate the guarantee that profits will flow to producers and local communities.
Before any of those alternatives can really be examined, we need to look at another component that the NIE framework allows us to, which is culture. So, if I'm a farmer in a cooperative, why should I care about cooperative-wide decisions? So one, participating in a cooperative may allow you to retain this whole idea of a legacy. Farms are a lot of times generational, so making sure that the cooperative is there for the next generation might be really important to people. Two, of course, is collective bargaining. It's way easier for a group of 10 to go ask for a price than me as a solo producer. Three, knowledge sharing. Cooperatives bring all ages and types to the table, so there's room to learn, and a great resource for that. And three, a cooperative structure allows farmers to have a collective voice on policy, whether it be locally, in the community, regionally, or nationally. And so, also, when we take into consideration of what happens next, we need to look at the two cultures of GLC and GPRE. So GLC is a cooperative. It's sensitive to their membership needs. They have an intimate knowledge of the markets and how grain procurement works. GPRE is more of that corporate feel. You have your stockholders, you have your board of directors. Stockholders may not really know what goes on in that day-to-day production. Also need to think about you have compensated directors and a compensated CEO at the GPRE level, so they are going to be paid based on their performance versus you have a voluntary structure of a cooperative. Cooperative individual goals may differ versus, of course, shareholders are motivated by profits generally. And of course, GLC has an extensive history in this. area, dating back to the Everly and Superior days. Versus GPRE, they really are the new kids in town, started in 2007, so that's going to play a role in what happens next.
So taking all these things we've considered so far, and if we go back to our original question, should GLC take the offer of $30 million and sell to GPRE at that current bid? We need to look at how we really are going to go about valuing the cooperative. The first thing we need to consider that is outside of what we considered on our book value at the current time would be the future value of patronage and the relationships we've established originating grain and how that can play into the future, and look at that and give that some value as well. Secondly, having a cooperative in the market and being a larger party as cooperatives continue to merge and players on the market are continually getting larger, you have to be a larger player to be more competitive and have an edge. And so that's something a co-op can provide. Another question we would have liked to consider in the case study is, we know the ethanol plant in Superior came in before the bid was offered to be able to look at the profits and how that was affecting margins at the cooperative before and after the current new ethanol plant was in place. So taking these things into consideration, we believe that the current bid undervalues the co-op. So another thing we'd like to look at is the profitability of ethanol at this time being in its infancy. In 2005, we had the Renewable Fuel Standard Act, and so when we look at this case study, one assumption we're trying to make is we're looking at it within the framework of the time period that actually happened, early 2007 and 2008. So kind of looking at the way ethanol profits and returns were at that time, and taking account whether we should discount our co-op because of uncertainty in the way the corn market's going to be, or the uncertainty of how ethanol is going to take off. We can see that the ethanol had a very large peak right after the initial Fuel Standard Act was implemented. And then gradually after that time, at the time of the bid, was starting to decrease. So it brought about some uncertainty in the ethanol market and how that was going to affect producers and originating grain. So taking all that into account, what is our recommendation for GLC? Our recommendation is they retain their current structure as a cooperative, as an open cooperative, and continue to work with the previous relationships they had with the Superior plant and originating grain with them. So looking at this current structure of governance and what it can offer and what some threats and weaknesses are of it, maintaining this structure, we maintain our collective bargaining power as a whole. We have some ability to work together and accomplish some more goals as a unit versus an individual farmer. We retain our future value of the patronage that they've worked so hard over the previous years in establishing relationships with farmers. And of course, it retains the legacy of the co-op for future generations to use as a marketing source as well as for inputs and such. Some of the possible weaknesses of the open co-op are those that are just generally associated with the open cooperative, being the free rider and horizon problem. Some opportunities, if we were to retain our open structure cooperative, it keeps the market competitive, potentially increase our prices as a unit, working together as a co-op of farmers. Also, we don't need to just look at the output side of the co-op advantages. We also have some advantages on our inputs, maybe some volume discounts on our fertilizer, on our grain, our seeds, and such like that. And then we have possible tax deductions for working as a co-op, whereas if you work under a corporate structure, you could be taxed twice on some of your income, and that's not something that's going to happen in a co-op being given a discount, a tax deduction for that. The biggest threat to the GLC remaining an open co-op is that our ethanol plant really takes off and takes the patronage away from our current co-op structure. One thing that a co-op really needs to have in order to maintain itself is to be able to retain equity and upkeep its facilities. And if that were to happen and we were to lose patronage, we would have some stranded assets that we'd no longer be able to take full advantage of if the ethanol plant were to take the patronage away.
So thank you for listening to our presentation, and we would love to hear your questions.